Wisconsinites are proud of the fact that they go out and do things in the winter. That they don't hunker down and disappear into their houses. They will go out in cold weather and snow. Every Wisconsinite has a story of how they went to pick somebody up in the middle of a blizzard, or they hiked across a lake in 20 below zero weather. The battle itself, as is so often the case in history, was transformational. You saw something that was organic, that was very different than how you might learn in a political science class. Something bad was going to happen. People tried to stop it. They didn't necessarily stop it, but in trying to stop it, they created a movement that may be sufficient to counter it. Every governor for the better part of the century who's been sworn in Wisconsin has been inaugurated in front of the statue of Robert M. LaFollette, the state's great progressive governor, great progressive leader. Well, Scott Walker was the first governor in memory to move his swearing in to the other side of the Capitol so he wasn't by LaFollette's bust. And I think we all probably should have noticed at that point. We all probably should have said, whoa, something's going on here.
Well, everyone was wondering what the Walker administration would be like. He ran on a platform of creating a lot of jobs and trying something different, and I think there were enough people in Wisconsin that were anxious about where the economy was and the need for jobs that he narrowly won the election with 52%.
Some of us were expecting not good things from him, but we also weren't really expecting it to become quite as big and as extreme as it did.
Now, I've been, as I said, been in the legislature for over 50 years, and I've served with 12 different governors, 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. And this current governor, Governor Walker, is a different type of governor.
There's a lot of folks I didn't vote for who ended up going into office, and whether I agree with them or disagree with them on everything, it usually plays out in a way that you would more or less expect, And in this case, it became evident pretty quickly that it wasn't going to play out the way that I expected, or I think the way that a lot of people expected.
There is a new crop of very active Republicans who were in college during the Reagan Revolution, when the social contract with America had been broken, global capital is becoming more competitive, and the states are globalizing, things are going to Mexico, GM is cutting back. The traditional story about the American dream is jeopardized. And so the people who represent the haves, the wealthy, global capital, are taking up that code. Like, what can we do to facilitate the accumulation of capital in the United States? And part of it is pushing back on labor costs, pushing back on the benefits, the pensions, the things that the American middle class had come to expect during Great Society and the boom, the post-war boom in the United States.
Wisconsin was the first state, I believe, to extend collective bargaining rights to public employees. So that's really been a bedrock principle of the way that Wisconsin has done business for decades now. And the Republican proposal from Scott Walker and the leaders in the legislature was that they were going to push through a repeal of those rights in a period of 1 week.
The governor announced, we've got a fiscal crisis. We don't have enough money coming in.
Wall Street tanked the economy. Lots of people were put out of work. That tax revenue was not coming in. We also had some leftover deficit from previous administrations.
We've dealt with hundreds of budget shortfalls. We never rewrote labor law.
I was actually at the press conference that he held to talk about the budget repair bill. And police and fire, of course, we knowing going into that we were going to be exempt. But exempt from what, we still weren't sure of.
He introduced it, I believe, on a Friday afternoon with the expectation that it would be passed first thing on Tuesday before any of the legislators had a chance to read it and know what was in it. We're talking a very significant piece of legislation. They had put together this cornucopia of right-wing dream ideas.
In essence, the bill gutted the rights of state employees. It gutted the unions.
And by the way, we've tucked in all these goodies that even, our supportive legislators don't know about.
And it was like being kicked in the stomach, because here he was saying, I'm going to take away your unions effectively. And if you dare to protest, I'm calling the National Guard.
So for over 50 years, we had collective bargaining rights for state employees in Wisconsin. And it worked, I think, very well. The governor, in one fell swoop, decided to eliminate that.
In addition to the repeal of bargaining rights that were being pushed through, there were just ridiculous changes in the law in terms of the governor being able to sell off state assets without bids.
Doing things like reopening the Las Vegas loophole.
The Las Vegas loophole allows major corporations across state lines to hide their taxable income out of state, especially in states that have low income taxes like Nevada. That's why it's called the Las Vegas loophole.
Meanwhile, all of our small businesses and medium-sized businesses are paying their taxes.
It also included changes to Badger Care, which is our healthcare system here in Wisconsin for lower income individuals.
It allowed them to change what they covered, what benefits they give, what conditions they would cover without notice, without public hearing, without a vote from the legislature.
Teachers, nurses, public employees did not object to sharing the sacrifice. In fact, they basically immediately agreed to the drastic cuts that Walker was proposing. This was never about finances, not ever.
There's a bullying component to the way that everything has been handled that just pisses me off. Most people don't like bullies.
It was craziness, taking away years and years of employer-employee peace and making him basically at-will employees.
It's almost like he systematically went through the different ways that he was going to take away people's rights, and it didn't seem to me that it had any effect on balancing the budget or helping people. It was just putting money in the pockets of corporations.
And I just consider this one of the biggest lies ever, that public workers are to blame for these state budget deficits and not Wall Street and everything that has occurred in this financial crisis. You never hear the words Wall Street coming out of Scott Walker's mouth.
Part of why we have pension laws in the public sector is because people don't get paid as much as they do for a similar job in the private sector, and that's been part of the trade-off. I mean, honestly, people who work for state government in many ways are public servants. They're taking that job because their mission is to serve the public, not to necessarily make the big bucks in a corporation.
Teachers in particular gave up salary increases year after year after year, and in turn, they agreed to take basically the benefits, the retirement, the insurance.
As a result of that proposal, Wisconsin, I guess, became alive politically.
The Saturday morning after Walker made his announcement, a bunch of teaching assistants, about 50 of them, not a huge number, came out in front of the University of Wisconsin Memorial Union with signs that said, stop the bill, and this will not pass. It was a small rally, but it was the first, it was really kind of this first signal that there was going to be a pushback. And the Teaching Assistants Association announced that they were going to march on the Capitol on Monday, which was Valentine's Day.
And it is about solidarity, because as unions go, to me, it's how the middle class goes.
I actually happened to be downtown for brunch on a Sunday, February 13th. I don't think there's very many brunches I've had in my life that I can tell you the date. And I was walking along the square, and there was a group of people standing on the corner with a bunch of signs. And I thought to myself, another Madison protest. And I was about to blow it off, and then I took a closer look, and I thought, wait a minute, that seems like something that would potentially affect my parents.
Suddenly there were thousands of people there that day. I think it was about 2,000 people who marched from UW to the Capitol and delivered these mountains of Valentine's cards to the governor's office. And I remember standing in the Capitol Rotunda sort of wedged against a wall leading up to the governor's office where the desk was where they dumped all the Valentines, and looking down the hallway and just seeing this mass of people. And, you know, I've been to so many protests in Madison over the 10 years I've lived here, and it's usually kind of the same faces and the same scattering of different issues that don't quite line up, can't really focus on one issue kind of thing. And I remember in that moment thinking how unusual it was, even at that early stage, seeing all these different people. It wasn't just students and TAs, it was all sorts of people who had come out for this.
You'd see little packs of people on a street corner with handmade signs saying, you know, we oppose the bill, or we're opposed to what the governor's doing.
We heard there was going to be the first rally on that Tuesday, and so we went down, and there were about 15,000 people on the steps.
We came up State Street and we walked up, and the outpouring of support that we got as firefighters and police officers were there as well. Was unbelievable.
So I had this picture looking down at the rotunda after we moved out of all these people standing in there, and I was like, wow, you know, I've never really seen the protests come inside like this before. This is sort of new. And by that night, word had started to really spread. And, you know, the next day, people kept showing up and the crowds kept getting bigger.
There wasn't going to be a public hearing at all scheduled, and then public input forced them to have a public hearing.
By Wednesday, things really started to pick up. You started to get signals that the teachers union in Madison was going to have its teachers not show up for work, but go to the Capitol to protest.
2 of my 5th grade students came up to me and told me that they were testifying. And I was blown away. I said, did someone ask you to testify? I said, no, I just want to go tell them how this is going to affect me, and I want to go speak for my teachers.
If you want to learn about something, you sit in and you listen to people who are affected by it.
So I went to go watch them, and they testified, and I cried, and I was really proud of them.
My testimony was primarily about, you know, I went to high school in Wisconsin. They taught us about the Wisconsin labor movement. In history, there's the workers and there's the people who try to bust up unions, and those have always been the bad guys.
I remember I was driving up to the Capitol the day that they went out, and usually it's a pretty easy drive. You know, 9 in the morning, it's not a traffic jam kind of town. But yeah, it was hard to get up. It's hard, you know, traffic was moving slowly, cars were being diverted. I didn't know what was going on. As I got closer, I saw the teachers had walked out that day. But this is 9 in the morning. 2,000 students had shown up at East High, a couple miles from the Capitol, and had decided to march up the main drag to the Capitol to support their teachers. And you're like, well, this is something very different than what we've seen before. These kids just got a snow day. They just got a day off from school. And instead of sitting home, they decided to join this movement. And when I got up to the Capitol, it wasn't just the several thousand coming from East High. Then, you know, there were several thousand more coming from the West Side who had marched all the way miles from the West Side. And then a little bit later, 7,000 students from the University of Wisconsin came marching in.
So that was where I kind of started formulating my opinions. Then that day, I downloaded the budget repair bill and started reading through it, and that's how I solidified my views. And you know, I wasn't fighting for anything at that point. I was participating in the process.
And one thing I really remember from that day was being in the Capitol Rotunda, and I think I was there on my lunch hour, and the police came in a large group, and everybody was starting to be nervous. And then the police started handing out bottles of water and sandwiches and chips. The police had been excluded from the loss of collective bargaining rights, and yet they were there with us, you know, feeding us. And that was a really moving moment.
I was I say amazed, because I was amazed, but I was also deeply moved by the incredible level of sophistication that people brought to this moment.
The signs, there's some good signs, man, like funny signs. And I will say this, regardless of beliefs, I don't think it could be debated that the protesters were very good at sign making, and the teabaggers, that's not their skill set. They're just the worst, like, you know, just the worst signs. There's a picture of Scott Walker stuck on someone's jeans in the back, and it says, does this ass make my jeans look big?
The Wisconsin struggle coming literally days after Hosni Mubarak, the Egyptian leader, stepped down because of popular protest. And so here you saw, I even asked the guy, he was a state employee, but a working class person who's like thinking of the most creative way to put it all together, and then the most subtle way, not to say, oh, this is just like Egypt. No, I thought Cairo would be warmer. And you saw that again and again and again. They didn't come out because their unions told them to. In fact, it was many days on the square where I would say without a question, the majority of people on the square were not active current union members.
It's really about my kids and their education, and their experience will be impacted by these changes. There's no question.
During that first week of the protests, it was, for lack of a better word, intense. People from all over Wisconsin were showing up at the state capitol, which was absolutely packed to the rims. And they were sleeping there, and they were eating there, and they were essentially living there. 3
large protests I've witnessed in my 50 years is the civil rights, the question about the Vietnam War, and this. And this was by far the largest and by far the most peaceful.
There were children there. There were small business owners. There were farmers. There were retirees. And so you had this incredible mix of folks. But they all got that something fundamental was threatened.
Schools throughout Wisconsin had to be closed due to the fact that there weren't enough teachers there. Madison employees also went on strike and actually were led on a parade by the mayor of Madison while they were striking.
Throughout the entire occupation, I call it an occupation, people call it an occupation, but for me, an occupation is something that you occupy something you don't have the right to be in.
Like when people were in the Capitol and they were sleeping there, people were coming around with food and sandwiches and things to drink. And I thought, it's just so nice. Like, this is so Wisconsin. Like, people are just taking care of each other.
Really was an amazing spectrum of like Wisconsin citizens.
Everybody was respectful and taking care of each other. And it was an amazing time. I mean, I'd never seen the Capitol so full of people.
I know a family who got married at the Capitol, and they went, I think it was their anniversary even, and they slept there that night, and they had their 2-year-old son with them. They thought, well, what better way to celebrate our anniversary? We got married here, we'll support this, and their 2-year-old kid was there.
The Joint Finance Committee, which is the first step, approved it.
And when that happened, there were already people in the Capitol, and it sort of galvanized everybody. And there was this huge, the crowd sort of, grew exponentially at that point.
That was the moment for me that I decided I wasn't going away, and I was going to keep fighting what was happening in Wisconsin because it was wrong. And it was so powerful to see so many citizens come together and fill the Capitol, not just the rotunda, but the entire Capitol. I mean, stairwells that when I was an employee at the Capitol, you never would even go in, were completely filled with people who cared so much about what was happening. And to me, that's so, even just thinking about it now is so inspiring.
At a certain point, you start feeling like I need to do something more, and you're not really sure what that is. You just want to do something. One day, and this was probably Thursday of that first week, maybe it was Friday, I had access to this giant American flag. And I decided, well, I'm going to take it up there. I don't know why, but it's a big flag, and it'll be kind of a, I don't know what I was even going to do with it. It's in this giant duffel bag.
Those people that were out there first few days, 1,000 or 8,000, 10,000, and then 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, these massive crowds. I would walk around the Capitol on some of those days. And the most amazing thing was, I couldn't go 10 feet without running into a cousin or a schoolmate or, a friend of a friend.
And so I carried it up there, and it was kind of rainy and crummy out. So everyone was in the Capitol, and the rotunda was packed. And this was before it was all locked down, so you could just walk in, even with a big black duffel bag, into a crowd of people.
And what you realized was this was Wisconsin pouring out from the far corners of the state, from way up in the north to down along the Illinois line, coming up to Madison. And they came because they thought they were supposed to. They thought that was the right thing to do and that this is how you make the process work.
I start walking out into the crowd and I'm unrolling this flag and it just keeps unrolling and unrolling. And then it just kind of spontaneously spreads out. It's over everybody's head. And from up above, Star Spangled Banner, they start singing and everybody in the place just sings the Star Spangled Banner. And it's like that kind of a thing is moving, and I don't know why. Does that make any difference in the cause? No, not really. But it gave me some kind of an outlet, It was kind of funny. It was kind of sleety, rainy, snowy, so everybody was wet, and it was really hot. Everybody had their winter jackets on and hats and stuff. As soon as that flag opened up, it was about 200 degrees under that thing, like instantly. I mean, it was cooking hot.
I remember meeting one lady, or hearing about one lady, incredible story. She was in her 80s. She lived in Whitewater, which is about 45, 50 miles from Madison, maybe even not that far. And she was in her 80s. She had never come to Madison before. But she was seeing all the reports and hearing about it. And so she came up with a friend drove her. She had a walker. And this is in all this snow and slush and everything. And she's pushing her walker, this 80-something woman. And she made a little handmade sign. And it said, "At least this walker is useful." That's very classic Wisconsin.
I'm going to have to tell where I got it from. Yeah, that flag's not coming back, It was kind of my contribution to the cause. Well, Star Spangled Banner gets done, and it gets folded up, and all the way folded up, handed to the side, and it comes all the way back around to where I was, because people just knew it came from that direction. And that also underscored, what a polite group of people, it's just scrawny, nice stuff, and you'd see that at every turn.
The only option to delay the passage of the bill was for the Democratic senators to leave so that they actually wouldn't be forced to vote.
People were alternating between chanting and hushing people, and all of a sudden I heard people going, "Oh my God, oh my God."
The 14 Democrats in Wisconsin Senate left.
We decided on the spur of the moment that we would leave the state to deprive the Republicans of the necessary quorum.
And then this cheer rang out because the 14 senators had walked out.
And decided we'd just disappear for that day. Just didn't expect to stay away for very long. I think Abraham Lincoln jumped out of a window one time to deprive a quorum when he was in the state legislature.
And they couldn't vote on it without at least one of the Democrats coming back.
And then word started to trickle in that they'd left the state. And I remember that being this huge moment where everybody kind of came together and everybody was pouring into the Capitol because we're like, okay, well, here's a chance to slow the process down on this.
To see tens of thousands of people here day after day and night after night just crying to be heard and making sure that the people would be able to keep their rights was really inspiring. It was also really a hard time because in spite of all that mobilization, all that activism, Governor Walker made it clear that he was not going to negotiate with anybody, and he had no intentions of reaching across the aisle and actually negotiate with people and coming up with some sort of peace.
It was really a dark period, I think, for Wisconsin, and then to have to go through where the senators had to leave the state, we had to stay and fight. We had the longest session in history before they cut us off, 62 nonstop hours.
We began to hear this rumor that Walker was going to clear the Capitol of the people who were sleeping there.
When we first heard that they were going to shut down the Capitol and kick a lot of people that were sleeping overnight out, we decided that we were going to stay overnight.
People were beginning to get nervous and upset and to talk about whether they would do civil disobedience. And, it was kind of a bad scene for a moment. And then all of a sudden, the firefighters walked in. And they had sleeping bags and sleeping pads. And they said, "We're staying with you. They won't throw us out."
Marble's not soft. My back felt bad in the morning, but it was worth it.
And the night after that, I think the police, it was really pretty amazing.
Some of the most committed rock and roll and folk music players did show up. And one of the first to come was Tom Morello.
When I was at the airport, people asked me why I was coming to Madison, Wisconsin. The answer was very simple. I said, I'm coming to Madison, Wisconsin because the people are making history in Madison, Wisconsin.
In February, I was watching the news with my wife. We were watching the protests where there were 100,000 people in the streets of Cairo as they were getting rid of their tyrannical dictator. Then the news immediately switched to 100,000 people in the streets of a Midwestern city called Madison, Wisconsin.
They did a great show out for all the protesters outside, and Morello went inside. But that night, they said, well, we're going to do a concert down in the basement of Monona Terrace.
For me, this fight is very personal. For 22 years, I've been a member of Los Angeles Musicians Local 47. I'm a card-carrying member of the Industrial Workers of the World. But more importantly, for almost 30 years, my mom was a public high school teacher in a small town in Illinois, Libertyville, Illinois. And we were a one-parent family. And we never had a lot of money. We never had any money, but we had enough money because my mom was a union high school teacher.
They came on stage, and the lead singer goes, well, hello, Madison, Wisconsin, and said a few rather unpleasant things about Scott Walker. And then he said, we're going to do this song called, Up the Union. And it's kind of had the feel of an old Irish fight song. And they started playing. And here you saw 6,000 young people with their fists in the air, clenched fists in the air, chanting Up the Union. There are people who've been involved in the labor movement for 50 years trying to create a moment like that. And it happened in Madison, Wisconsin on a cold night in February. Thousands of young people cheering for labor rights, cheering for a union, in this very passionate, unapologetic way with their fists in the air.
So there were several key moments that really kind of kept things going. And honestly, it was sort of thanks to the Walker administration pulling all this crap, basically, that kept people coming down to the Capitol and kept the movement building.
The governor and his allies, through their particular moves, kept us from coming back.
And that was summed up by perhaps the most bizarre event of the entire Wisconsin struggle, which was the call by Ian Murphy, a blogger in Buffalo, New York, to Scott Walker's office, in which he posed as one of the Koch brothers.
Being a bit of a prank monkey has been my MO, but this is by far the most successful prank I've ever pulled. But originally, the idea was to call posing as Hosni Mubarak, the recently ousted dictator of Egypt, and he was going to call from the Egypt portion of the Epcot Center, just kind of wistfully crying over the flag and telling old Scott Walker he doesn't know what he has until it's gone and, cherish this dictatorial moment, Scotty. But as it turned out, I spent all night kind of trying to nail this Hosni Mubarak accent. I just could not do it. So I came across an article in the Huffington Post, actually, by Amanda Turkle, and there was a quote in there by Tim Carpenter, one of the Democrat senators in exile. And he said, Scott Walker will not talk to us, etc. So I just figured, who could, with all we know about what's going on? So I figured, one of the Koch brothers could probably get through.
Perhaps he took the call from Koch because he knew the guys from back in old Alec days when he was a state legislator.
I really just pretended to be myself, except older, richer, and horrible. I'm on the phone for 5 minutes listening to a ringtone. Sometimes it's busy, they hang up on me, ring, ring, ring. This is for 5 to 10 minutes each time I call. That David Koch would have to suffer such indignities is ridiculous. Anyway, I finally get through. They transfer immediately on the second call to Keith Gilks, the chief of staff. And he's just pleased as punch to hear from me. He insists Scott's in a meeting. They'll have to call me back. So immediately this is a problem because I'm calling from Skype and I can't receive a call. I don't have a number set up for that. So I make up this story about my maid, Maria. She's washed my phone, so I'm calling from the void using the snipe. And, my maid she's otherwise excellent. I'd have her deported, but she's otherwise excellent. Gilks thought this was hilarious. So he says, okay, sure, just call back at this time. And I called back again, and I got right through the governor.
Everybody got to hear what his real intentions were when he thought he was talking to this billionaire who was bankrolling these conservative agendas across the country. And I think it added a lot of fuel to the fire, and certainly had the Senate Democrats staying away, not just for a day or two, but for weeks at a time. So that created a national story.
He was trying to trick the Democrats back into session. He was being, kind of sycophantic to the point of, creepy with this guy he thought was potentially going to, I don't know, bankroll his presidential campaign or something.
It just made it really clear that this was his boss that he thought he was talking to. And I think that was deeply embarrassing for him. And it was really important for the people who were protesting because it illustrated the point that they were trying to make about the corporate control of the administration.
He brought out a picture of Ronald Reagan, and he was getting all weepy about Reagan firing the air traffic controllers. Like that was some great moment in American history, instead of, kind of the downfall of the empire.
There was one governor, and there were 150,000 people, and they got equal time in the media.
The media is just corporate owned. I mean, they're cowards.
There were some funny moments, like when Fox News presented that footage of what they said was the violence in the streets of Madison.
There was a palm tree in the back at a Capitol House. So obviously that wasn't in the state of Wisconsin.
So that was when the blow-up palm trees started appearing at the Capitol.
What's really, really plaguing our society right now in the media, and it's been talked about a little bit, is this false equivalence. This idea that he said this, and then this liberal guy said this. Who knows who's right? When in fact you could, take their claims and base them, against empirical evidence.
What I saw at the rallies, though, was a spirit and a sense of energy that I've never seen in anything before, in sports or anything. I mean, people were really angry, but people really knew the issues, and people really knew what was at stake.
You always end up going to these anti-war rallies, which are, non-existent under Obama, unfortunately. But it's all these, dreadlocked hippies with, communist flags. And it's just the best people to ever marginalize your movement. But in Madison, it was just, the everyday people, farmers, teachers, everyone. It was really, really touching just to see all these people, everyone from every walk of life kind of banding together to say this is bullshit.
To see 60, and then one time we had over 100,000 people at one rally, all for one common cause, all in the state of Wisconsin, to me is unreal, and it still is unreal. And I haven't had time to sit back and reflect on that, but I mean, that is just absolutely amazing.
They had the votes. They passed this bill. It is law. The unions have been fairly destroyed in the public sector. So they got what they wanted, and they could have done it with so much less headache for them had they just simply followed the rules and followed the process.
The police were really cool. I mean, to be in Madison and to hear the chant, "We love cops, we love cops," if you know Madison's history, it's a mind blower.
That's when they locked the doors to the Capitol. They said, if you leave now, and come back tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, just like every day. And the next morning, when people came back at 7 o'clock, the doors were locked. They wouldn't. It was about 3 or 4 days then that they didn't let anyone into the Capitol.
So the best way to get bills passed, of course, is not to have a full public debate and have, people air the pros and cons and see all the ugliness of the bill. The best way to pass a bill is just to roll it into the budget in the dead of the night when no one's paying attention.
The subsequent changes that came with the budget made it clear that, the governor wasn't just going to attack collective bargaining rights for public workers. He was actually going to go after the very things that hold up the middle class in this state.
We added political appointments to different departments we've never had before, so you had a bunch of cronies literally getting into almost every department across state government.
We extended more than $2 billion worth of corporate tax breaks in the same budget, where we told working people and students, sorry, we don't have any money, we're gonna have to make do with less. And that, for me, is the part that I think really gets at everybody. I mean, there's just a basic sense of unfairness.
And there's very little evidence that giving away bigger and bigger tax breaks to corporations in any way stimulates the economy or in any way creates jobs.
And the whole idea of calling it a repair bill is just offensive.
Unfortunately, it not only do the policies hurt a lot of people, but the approach hurt a lot of people too. And that's just not the way that things typically are done in America to some degree, but in Wisconsin especially. I think we've always looked out for each other, and we've always, we have been concerned about not coming off like a dick, or whatever. That's just how we are here.
Judge Albert had written a concurrence. I don't know how all that legal stuff works, but there was a letter that he wrote to the people remaining in the Capitol. It resulted in us deciding to leave on our own free will, and that was a powerful moment.
Sign of support from the president maybe would have been nice, but help did come in other forms. Michael Moore comes. The musicians, Michelle Schacht and Tom Morello and all these folks start coming.
On March 9th, they called an illegal meeting with a legal notice, removed all of the fiscal items from the budget repair bill. They removed all of the fiscal items from the budget bill.
And there was maybe a few hundred of us, I'd say, in the Capitol by the time they closed the doors at 6 p.m. We're all outside the Senate area where they're doing their vote, and the chants are going, and I remember the one that hit me hard was "You lied, you lied, you lied to Wisconsin," and even now that one hits me hard.
Politics is a life, and if we don't elect kings, then if you're elected to an office and you don't do the job that the people want you to, and it really is egregious that you're seen as truly violating the public interest or some sense of the public good, then you can be removed from office. Not at the next election, but immediately.
I decided to work for Scott Fitzgerald's recall on March 9th, 2011. On that night, he convened a meeting in the dark of night, after normal business hours, without giving even 2 hours notice as required by law. I decided that night, I'm gonna work really hard to recall him. If I have to crawl on my hands and knees through the snow to every house in his district, I'm gonna work to recall him.
They didn't give the 2 hours notice. They scheduled it right away, rammed it through in a matter of minutes. And that, by the way, gave us our exit strategy. When we saw that on TV, we said, now we can come back. They've completely screwed up the works to the point where we've done all we could do. They passed the bill in violation of the rules. We can come back and continue our fight back there. We accomplished our purpose. We accomplished the purpose of letting people know what was going on, letting them know what was in this bill.
Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. And that one, you'd hear it throughout the protests, But in this case, it's like we're in a lockdown building. People are getting physically hauled out of this room. The windows are bolted shut. People can't get in. There's ride gear being unloaded. It's like, this isn't what democracy looks like. I've seen democracy. It's not this.
It still had to go through the assembly the next day. It passed the assembly with no debate, no talk, and then immediately got caught up in the courts.
And it was really, I ended up going into the bathroom and just like there's a little window ledge, and I just sat on this window ledge and I just cried.
One of the most moving moments for me was the day after the Senate passed the budget repair bill and the Assembly then approved it. I went back to the Capitol after work and I left the Capitol. And as I stepped out, there was a parade of the firefighters with their bagpipes playing Amazing Grace. And I just immediately burst into tears because after everything that happened, they were still there.
The biggest protest was right after that.
People throw numbers around. At 200,000 people, all the side streets, the sidewalks were packed up and down State Street and King Street and Hamilton Street.
Couldn't see the concrete or the grass for the tens of thousands of people that were extremely upset.
Just the mass of humanity, and in harmony, chanting the same thing, saying the same thing, talking.
Governor Walker gave them an opportunity to show just how well they could handle the cold. And of course they did it, with stellar performance.
There was people from Rib Lake and Ogama, Athens and Marathon, all these little towns around here who were teachers. And it was great to see farmers there and great to see private sector workers there. And, rock stars and movie stars. And it was the scene. It was the most significant political event that I've ever experienced in my life. And I think for many people, it was the same thing.
There were protests every weekend after that, continuing up until May Day.
People's attention started to turn to the recall elections of the Republican senators. And at that point, it was important to sort of send people out into the state.
Most of us grew up in something that we referred to as a democracy. We now live in something that might better be referred to as a dollarocracy. We have a politics in America where almost every question about our political life is determined by how much money you can raise and how much money you can continue to bring to a fight that you are in.
In a normal election for governor, there's a campaign donation limit where you cannot give any more than like $5,000 to a candidate for governor. But in a recall election, there's a loophole that says the recalled candidate can collect money during the recall process without any limit. So because of that, Walker was able to get checks for $200,000, $300,000, one $500,000 check. He could go to Arizona and Texas and Florida and come back with $2 million at a shot because people were not limited to the amount of money they could contribute. And that allowed him to raise unprecedented amounts of money.
The minute that the recall petition gathering began, the governor was able to pretty much do unlimited fundraising. So he promptly left the state and raised just obscene amounts of money and could run against just the idea of the recall.
He was very, very good at fundraising. He was also very, very good at making contacts with the people who could keep that money flowing. And the people who could keep the money flowing wanted real change. They wanted fundamental change. And I think he determined to be their point man.
There was a large percent of the population in the state that just no matter what Scott Walker had done, unless it really approached being something criminal or something where he was charged with a crime, I just thought that they wouldn't support a recall.
So he's telling everybody that the recall really isn't a valid thing to be doing. But meanwhile, he's broken pretty much every campaign pledge that people would have elected him on. He was not elected to break the unions. He was not elected to sell off state assets. And if he'd campaigned on those things, it might have been a very different election.
Even if they didn't support Scott Walker or his policies, they felt you got to give this guy a chance. He was duly elected. He hasn't done anything wrong other than put forward policies that almost half the state was upset about.
This is the state of Bob LaFollette and the state of Joe McCarthy. And when people call it a purple state, it's not because people are middle of the road. It's because there are a lot of people on both sides of any issue out there.
Citizens United basically says that corporations are people and that corporations have a right to free speech. And it has, in my experience, it's completely changed how politics works. As a naive first-time candidate, I thought politics was going out and meeting people, knocking on doors, having rallies, doing debates. My opponent didn't really campaign. As far as I know, the only time that he made a public, announced campaign appearance was our debate, and we only had one debate. He didn't really campaign out in the open. But he didn't have to because we had all this stuff going on behind the scenes. The phone calls that were happening, the door visits that were happening that I don't think they were volunteers of his. I think that it was coordinated by outside groups that aren't regulated because of Citizens United.
Our corporate business leaders are smart. They understand that if they can invest, X million dollars in particular legislative races, that when it comes to policy being created in their favor, they will win tenfold, they will win 20-fold.
Money can buy data, it can buy great analysis, it can buy great polling. All of these things are, in my mind, so much more important than the TV commercials because they determine what's in the TV commercials and they determine when and where they get played. And it's just amazing what these people can do with the amount of money that they have.
When you see 6 commercials for Scott Walker and then see maybe only 1 or 2 for the other side, that's not the will of the people, and that's not really reflective of what the people of the state believe.
The unlimited money in terms of advertising dollars allowed a narrative to go forward, and that narrative was kind of, why are you picking on me? I'm just trying to solve the hard problems of the state. After all, the state is broke. And they were able to say that over and over and over without analysis. The state is broke, the state is broke.
Their concerns are focused on these international, multinational corporations who are controlling the discourse because they're the ones with the money and they're the ones that contribute to the campaigns. They're the ones who are given the speech because they can afford it.
It's unfortunate because we're not getting ahead, I don't think, by anyone's estimation. Democrats, Republicans, far left, far right, I don't think anyone would look and go, yeah, we're actually making progress.
I think that the Wisconsin legislature is more polarized now than in any time that I've been in the legislature. And as I say, I've been in for over 50 years.
The reason I think you're getting more entrenched is there is an extreme agenda within the Republican Party that says all of those structures impose on my freedom because it requires taxes to pay for them. And I don't believe in those things, and I want to eliminate or reduce or privatize as many of those things as I possibly can. And it's based on this belief that when that happens, Adam Smith's invisible hands will come into play and the market will cure all those ills. Now, we know through history that that hasn't worked in this country, and a lot of the things that hold up the middle class were reforms that came out of the Great Depression and the Gilded Age and these other things when there were huge wealth disparities.
You know, it's like one group says, hey, we're going to build this thing, and then the other group says, okay, we're going to knock that thing down and then build this thing, okay, and then the next group comes in. We just keep building and knocking down the same things. And, you know, there's no larger, like, nonpartisan, let's build America, you know? There's nothing like that because we're too busy building and tearing down the same stuff over and over again.
I think everyone knows now where these things came from. And of course, the budget repair bill, you know, this idea of teachers and firemen and all public servants being the enemy, that didn't come from Wisconsin. And Scott Fitzgerald did not campaign on that. He campaigned on jobs and economic development like he always has for the last 20 years. And when he realized he had a majority in the Senate, and when his brother realized he had a majority in the Assembly, and they realized they had the governorship, then all of a sudden the conversation changed really fast. And they tried to make it sound like it came from us, but it didn't.
Well, we didn't know about the American Legislative Exchange Council really until the protests started. I don't think it was on the radar of people in Wisconsin.
This is an organization that really has become the breeding ground for a new kind of much harder-edged, more passionately conservative, and more passionately pro-corporate Republican politician.
Through ALEC, legislators and corporations come together. Corporations hand them the law changes that they desire, and the legislators take it up and go back to their state houses and introduce this cookie-cutter legislation as their own brilliant ideas.
Ultimately, what happens is this stuff gets passed state by state by state. It's almost all for a special interest, not for the public good. And what we saw in Wisconsin, from the collective bargaining law changes to the pension law changes to photo ID, are all ideas that have come through ALEC.
This is a sustained attack across the entire United States. It's not just happening here. It was going to happen in Iowa, but they were able to back it off. Indiana, you know, it's happening in Ohio. They're trying to do the same thing with SB 5 in Ohio. It's happening in Michigan.
As Scott Walker said during the call, he thought of himself as the first domino for this agenda to kind of happen all over the country.
So these bills that supposedly were just about putting our fiscal house in order had actually been crafted by corporations as a way to meet what they felt their needs were.
We always knew kind of that there were those people out there that wanted to have a monopoly, so to speak, the communism of millionaires, I like to call it. But I mean, there's people that are just trying to take over every facet of government.
It's more or less disaster capitalism, shock doctrine kind of stuff. Naomi Klein expresses this process very, very well in her book. And it's this idea of crying wolf, the government's broke, therefore we must slash these programs, your rights.
I mean, they are talking about jobs, jobs, jobs. And we heard this from this current administration that they're going to concentrate on job creation, being fiscally conservative. But all we've seen is more money to corporations, tax cuts for corporations. The Las Vegas loophole is back. We are open for business. You come in the state of Wisconsin, you pay no income tax for 2 years. But what does the middle class citizen have? Taking our workers' rights away. That's what we got out of this.
I think the middle class is going away. And that's a powerful thing to say anyways, but especially when you look at our state, which to me, we're the epitome of middle class, you know? The entire state, to me, I mean, that's what we're built on, hardworking people, you know? And unfortunately, you know, the people with money are being pushed higher and higher, and the people without it are being pushed lower and lower. Everyone's getting pushed to the extremes, and there's this kind of hole, I think, that we're going to start seeing right in the center of it. And that's too bad, because that hole, that crater, that's our state for the most part.
what we've seen in the last 30 years is a huge transfer of wealth from the masses, from the middle class, to the very richest among us. And right now, we're at a place where we've been only a couple times before in our history, in the Gilded Age, and, where we have 1% of the population controlling 90% of the wealth.
Back then, they called them robber barons. Now we're calling them job creators. So we have to know our history to know where we're going.
It's no coincidence. It's deregulating Wall Street. It's these kind of scams, these mortgage scams, which, pilfer the middle class.
There's nothing wrong with being rich and wealthy. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, who among us doesn't want to be rich and wealthy? Let's be honest. But pay your taxes. And we keep talking about shared sacrifice and fair share. And, the state is broke.
The economy does well when the middle class has money to spend. And right now, I just feel like we have been squeezed for everything we've got.
Just because they're making more money and making more product doesn't automatically create more jobs.
They're destroying government as we know it, and they're destroying the middle class. It's a terrible situation which is happening right now in Wisconsin.
It's a war on the middle class.
Well, people always like to have politics come like a Christmas present, all wrapped up in a box. You open it up, and there you have it. It's all done. But politics doesn't really work that way. Politics is a process. Robert M. LaFollette, the great Wisconsin progressive, said that democracy is a life, i.e., it goes on constantly. And nothing is finished on election day. You hold an election, you put people into office, they are your representatives. They may do a good job, they may do a lousy job, but your job as a citizen is to keep on them, to hold them to account, to challenge them, to push them, to support those who you like, to oppose those you don't, to prod them.
Working class solidarity in general, and unions in particular, that is our line of defense. The people who own and control this world do not deserve to. They do so in the name of profits. And they do not care whether your children have enough to eat or, the warm enough clothes to wear to school. They care about their shareholders' bank accounts. And as long as that's the case, we are vulnerable.
A third of public workers, a third of teachers vote for Republicans. I don't think that will happen again for a decade, at least. So there has been a fundamental political shift, but it's been a marginal one in that sense. But it's been very strong, and it's the type of consciousness I like to see raised, people voting and acting in their economic interest. And if that is put in place and that consciousness is in place, I think the future looks good for working people in the country.
I predict a drastic increase in citizen involvement in government in kind of unconventional ways. It's desperately what's needed right now. We can't just keep continuing to elect the lesser of two evils, hoping that it'll result in some good, because it hasn't and it won't until we change the process. So I'm excited.
The future's unwritten. We'll see what happens. But I think that there's a lot of power that's come through the grassroots, and I hope it will be enough to balance the influence of out-of-state money.
The Wisconsin uprising is still going today. People around the state realize that I can't sit back and be complacent anymore. I've got to do something.
This kind of engagement with my community doesn't begin or end around an election. And it doesn't necessarily begin or end around any one particular political issue. Instead, it is an ongoing commitment to the people that I live with and the state that I live in and the country that I live in and the world that I live in, a desire to make these things better for people.
What I saw on the streets of Madison in February was, I've never seen anything like it. I played literally hundreds of benefit shows and protests and picket lines and things like that. I've never seen anything like that. The fact that it's union police officers and anarchist students high-fiving each other and sharing bratwurst in the occupied Capitol. I've never seen anything like that.
Next question is, where does this movement go next? Does it mature into a very bold, and I would argue, in the streets and in the polling booths movement, a movement that really keeps a lot of pressure on politicians, not just Republican politicians, but even some Democratic politicians, to be much more progressive in their approaches, much more sympathetic to labor, but also sympathetic to the idea that we need public education, public services, a commons where we come together and do certain things. If the movement articulates these ideas well and finds, I think, a new generation of leaders, not the people who are the predictable players, but some new folks coming up, I think there's a real possibility, a fundamental possibility, that Wisconsin could see a rebirth of its progressive tradition, coming out of what seemed at some points like a very dark moment.
I think it's going to get better, but it might get a little worse before it gets better.
Well, I read in the paper today that on Labor Day, the crowd at the Labor Temple was twice what it had ever been in history. And that people there were saying, this is the silver lining. This is what Walker created. He has re-energized the labor movement.
I hope that as a group, we can remain vigilant here and still fight for what we think is right for Wisconsin. I still get up to the Capitol, you know, every time now if I'm up there, you know, having a drink or something and it's late at night, I'll walk around the Capitol every single time. And it used to just be, oh, that's a nice looking building, you know, and now it carries so much more meaning for me.
He's not only re-energized the labor movement, but if there is an upside to the legislation that he passed, and I'm not saying that there is, but this need to rethink what a labor union is and how it can operate, and to move away from the more kind of institutionally grounded collective bargaining table negotiations to being in the streets with your other community members, figuring out how to serve the interests of your workers. That can only be healthy for the labor movement as a whole.
You know, just there's so many memories attached to it, and all of a sudden it does represent a principle, which is always what it was supposed to do, but it never really did for me. You know, it was just a structure, and now it's so much more than that. And, you know, every time I see it, I think about all the time that was spent there and all the people that were there and all the positive energy that was focused in that one place. And it's a special place, and that won't ever go away for me.
Wisconsin's initial progressive moment back in 1900s into the 19-teens, 1920s, 1930s was rooted in a terrible time that came before. We had a financial panic of 1893. Then we had robber barons and grain companies that really ripped Wisconsin off horribly. And this young guy, Robert M. LaFollette, barely into his 40s, went out and said, it doesn't have to be this way. We can change this state fundamentally. We can make a fairer, more economically just system and a more open, more democratic politics. It worked a century ago and transformed Wisconsin. I like to think that what happened in February, March of 2011 might be a similar moment and might yield a similar transformation. And if it does, I suspect that Wisconsin will do what it always has. You know, Louis Brandeis called Wisconsin America's laboratory of democracy. And we might be that again. And if we are, I will be just a little bit more proud of the state I'm always very proud of.
What I saw on the streets of Madison was a vision of a unionism for the future that could outstrip anything that we've seen in the United States history. It was a vision. It seemed like anything was possible, that it could be about much more than stopping one bad law, much more than ousting one bad governor, that let's make a checklist of the kind of world that we'd like to see, the kind of state we'd like to see, the kind of country we'd like to see, the kind of world we'd like to see, and let's fight for that. That's what I felt here.
History's not made by presidents or popes or kings or queens or generals or CIA kingpins running dope. History's not made by nine-robed men or billionaires or bankers. It's not made by them. Black Spartacus heart attack machine. Black Spartacus heart attack machine. Black in my home. I used to think I was alone, well, I ain't alone no more. Black Spartacus heart attack machine. Black Spartacus heart attack machine. Black Spartacus heart attack machine. Go!
This hat I'm wearing, saw to it that you're sharing. Stock went up a quarter of a penny. Some mom and pop, they lost their shop. You know this and you still won't give them any. Give them a break. It's all they're looking for, what's at stake. For your big old mega store, maybe ask them to make one of the products on your floor. There are so many, could you handle just one more? Don't do it for me, do it 'cause that's what big brothers are for. Say you stand for the red, white, and blue corps, that it's all about community. But your goods come from abroad, and as the people lose their real jobs, you have them part-time work once they turn 73. Give them a break. It's all they're looking for, what's at stake. For your big old mega store, let me ask them to make one of the products on your floor. There are so many, could you handle just one more? Don't do it for me, do it 'cause that's what big brothers are for. Music.
But oh, wonder how lost, say it again. I am chasing a dream. I am chasing it now. But oh, wonder how lost, say it again. My heart is my drumbeat, shaking hands, my friend. My love will be with me always. I say again, baby. Oh, wonder how lost, say it again.